So to hop in, I played two sessions this week. This week was a bit of a roller coaster. I started off quite well in the first session. A lot of things went my way, made some hands in some critical spots, and was able to win about $9,500. So great first session. Started off the year on top of the world. Then reality hit it. In my second session of the week, did not quite go as well. Played a lot of big pots. A lot of the pots went against me and ended up losing around $7,500. Okay. So the first interesting hand was from the first session. In this particular hand, there was a smaller button straddle. I want to say someone straddled for $15, and I was in one of the blinds. So I opened from the big blind to $50, and I get called in three spots. So we're going to a flop of approximately $400, and I opened with Ace 3 Jack 5 double suited from the big blind. Uh, I would say that, I think this is a pretty standard open. It's probably something that the solver says to fold, but I think anytime I have a hand that can make the nut flush in these type of games, I'm willing to open it, and if I get three bet, I'll decide what to do from there. But this is a pretty standard open for me. So we go to the flop four ways, and I flop Jed. The flop comes three diamonds. I'm sitting with the nut flush and loving life. As I mentioned, there's $200 in the pot. We went four ways, and I was in the big blind, so I'm first to act. So in these scenarios, I want to start to put money in the pot. I don't want to run the risk of it being checked through and not starting to build a pot. So I immediately bet with a half pot bet of $100. Surprisingly, I get called in two spots. So now we're going to a turn card with $500 in the pot, and the turn card is a blank, an offsuit, whatever. So now the hand gets interesting. So there's $500 in the pot. I got called by two players. So my thought process on these two players were, a lot of times if I just have the naked ace on a flush board, I'm going to bet small, and then I'm going to go pot pot. And I just felt with these players, maybe I get one more bet out of the turn, but on the river, they're just going to fold any hand. Because they're just, if I go all three streets, they're just going to give me credit for having the nuts. And, I find in general it's really hard to get paid on these flush boards when you hold the nut flush, especially out of position. So I also think, I'm a fairly aggressive player. I'm betting a lot on these type of boards. So to get called in two spots, I felt like it was very likely someone had another flush and maybe the other player had a set. And if I were to check and give up, um, maybe one of the other players would put money into the pot for me, and then I can go for a check raise. Uh, and because I'm going to be betting this board a lot with with pretty bad flushes, or just shitty hands with a random high diamond, I think it's, natural for me to bet and then give up and look like I'm disinterested in the pot. So sometimes I want to have the nuts when I give up so I can, punish people for going for small value. Uh, so I check, and both players behind check check. So the plan is not working. Uh, so we go on to the river. There's still $500 in the pot, and the river is another irrelevant card, an offsuit something that doesn't pair the board. So the action's on me again. And in the same scenario, I think it's important to tell a consistent story when playing in these type of hands. So I elected to check one more time, and with a plan of check raising any bet that goes in. And my thought process here, same thought process on the turn. I'm playing this hand as a give up, one of my mini hands that will bet the flop and then decide to give up. Um, So I'm continuing to tell that story. So, sorry, my phone is ringing. I'm not sure who this is. Okay. So I'm continuing to tell that story of I just bet randomly on the flop and I'm giving up and I'm hoping one of them kind of value on themselves with a worse flush or maybe try to get really thin value with top set or straight. So I check. Another player, the second player checks, and the player closing the action puts in a bet of $200. So my plan is coming into action. So let's think about it. So he bets 200. The action's to me. Obviously, I have the nuts and I'm going to raise. But if we think about it in general, even if I didn't have the nuts, I would still raise him quite frequently when he makes this bet after check, check, then putting out a weak bet of 200 when nothing on the board changes. Because he's betting 200 into a pot of 500. So to me, this is a weak bet. So there's two sizes I could do here. I could do a small size and kind of click it back to him. And there's value in this because the times that you're really strong, you make it easy for your opponent to just talk himself into a call with the worst hand. And, if you do that consistently, then when you recognize these situations, it allows you to bluff for cheaper in the future. However, in this particular scenario, I decided to go for full pot. So he bet 200. I then checked raise for 1100. The other player folded. And now the person who made the weak bet is hating life. He's talking out loud like, why the fuck did I bet? Jesus. And after a long tank, he shows that he has the king high flush and just has to put the money in. And we win the pot. So that worked out well for me. I was a little nervous that I gave up the betting lead when I had the nuts, but I just had a feeling that to get called in two spots on a flush board, if I go bet, I don't think I'm going to get all the money because it's very strong to bet into multiple people on a kind of like a dead board where the nuts are not going to change that frequently. So I thought the best way to get action was to go for the check raise, and fortunately it worked out for me. Though in this scenario, the guy with the king high diamonds, he might have called down either way. So I'm not sure if it was the best action, but it worked out here. So that's the only interesting hand from the first session. Everything else kind of standard, and hands just kind of played out the way you would expect them to play out, and I got fortunate to win a lot of money. So let's go to the second day. There are quite a few interesting hands from the second day that I want to share with you all this week. So to set the context for this game is slightly bigger than the game I played earlier in the week. Well, it's almost double the stake. So it's 10-10 with an optional straddle of either 25 or 50. So most hands are played with a $25 straddle, and towards the later night, the $50 straddle starts to come out a bit more regularly. But for the most part, it's playing 10, 10, 25. So I guess very similar to the stakes before, but it plays bigger because of the option for the 50 and the player pool in general. They're just willing to buy in for more money. So a few interesting hands from the second session. So let's start off with the first hand that I wish to share. So this hand starts with a $25 button straddle. Again, I am in the blinds. And there's one caller before it comes to me, the big blind, and I open for full pot for $100. The action goes call, 3-bet to 400, call. So we go into a pot, a 3-bet pot, 4 ways, $400 a person, so approximately $1,600 in the pot. I have ace deuce 4-4 single suited. My thoughts on this hand is objectively I should have folded pre-flop. Ace deuce 4-4, one does not play single suited with the ace high suit. It doesn't play great in a multi-way pot, and it doesn't play great in a 3-bet pot. So I decided to take a flop in a 3-bet multi-way flop with a hand that does not play well. So first mistake made in this hand. Probably I'm the only one to blame for the results. And I guess you can figure out how this hand is going to go. So the flop comes Gen, I think. The board comes Ace, Deuce, 8, Rainbow, and one of my suit for the backdoor nut flush draw. So this is a good board for me. Me having top and bottom pair on Ace, Deuce, 8. Really, the only hands I'm losing to are occasionally 8-8, occasionally Ace-Ace, which I block, occasionally Deuce-Deuce, which I block, and Ace-8, which I guess could happen sometimes. So I check. The action goes to the original 3-bet. It goes check, check. The original 3-better makes a bet of $1,000. So, a little bit less than 2/3 pot. It folds, and now the action's on to me. So this is a interesting spot here. I'm sitting here with top and bottom pair in a 3-bet pot. The original raiser makes a decent sized continuation bet into 3 other players. One player's already folded. There's a player between me and the original 3-better, but I'm not really as concerned about that player. On Ace, Deuce, 8, it's just so hard to have a really strong hand. So my decision point here, the 3-better who put the action in the pot after their $1,000 bet, they have approximately $2,800 behind. So given the size of the pot, there's $1,600 in the pot. Their $1,000 bet makes the total pot $2,600, and they have one pot size bet behind, essentially. And I'm sitting here with top and bottom pair. So my thought process was simply this: if I call this bet, there are no good turn cards for my hand, right? Any turn card could either counterfeit my hand if it pairs the board, or any card brings in a possibility for a higher 2 pair with just a random ace that could be continuation betting. And, in the moment, I thought the hand my opponent was most likely to 3-bet me with and then want to bet on this board was some type of ace Broadway combination. And I felt in the moment that I could get a hand like that to fold, because on Ace, Deuce, 8, I shouldn't really have any bluffs, right? It's an ace high board. They could just have aces and I'm drawing dead. So, for me to raise on this spot, I think I do 2 things well. One, I get a hands with a lot of equity to fold, like ace and 3 side cards above the 8 that can draw and make a higher 2 pair. I'm doing like 50-50 against those type of hands. And getting those hands to fold will be a tremendous win, because I just get to take the pot down right now, and it's quite a large pot. On the flip side, if I get called by one of those hands, it's not the end of the world. It's pretty high variance, but again, it's pretty much a 50-50 scenario. So if we have to just pray to the variance gods, we pray to the variance gods, whatever. And every once in a while I'm going to run into aces and I'm just fucked. So that would suck. But a lot of times I think she's going to fold just a single pair ace with 3 overcards. So as you can tell how I'm describing this hand, I go all in. The player in between folds. The original raiser size puts the money in, and we go to run out. The run out comes 8-8 on both boards. I get counterfeit, and she wins with a higher ace. So, sucks for me. Love to hear your all's thoughts on that hand. I've really gone back and forth if I thought my play was either good or bad. I can't decide. On one hand, for the reasons I discussed, I think it's kind of good. But on the flip side, um, you know, am I playing too much of a high variance spot in a scenario where best case scenario, it's a coin flip, worst case scenario, I'm drawing dead against a fairly competent player when in the game as a whole, there's probably easier money to be got and probably spots that I can navigate more easily. Instead of committing all my money here in this situation, I'm not sure if I made a mistake. I see it both ways. I don't think it was horrible, but maybe I'm being a bit results oriented since I lost a big pot in that hand. Okay. Next interesting hand from this session. Again, I find myself in the blinds. So maybe that's something I should take a learning from. Again, $25 shadow. I look down at double suited King Jack 7-5 and I open to $100. I get called by 4 players and we're going to a pot out of position, approximately $400 in the pot. And the board comes Ace King Jack with 2 clubs. So I flop bottom 2 pair and a Jack high flush draw, and or Jack high second nut flush draw. So I have a decent flop, not a great flop, a flop that I can sometimes have the best hand, a flop that I can sometimes be drawing dead, and not really a flop that I want to put a ton of money in, but probably a flop that I need to see a few more cards. Just against the nuts, my hand is doing quite well. So, we're ready to see a few cards. We're ready to make a call, but we're not really looking to play a big pot with this flop and this hand in particular. So the action goes, I check, next to act checks, and the same girl who stacked me in the previous hand, she puts out a bet of $200 into a pot of around $400. So she bets about half pot. I obviously call. It folds. I obviously call with the second nut flush draw and 2 pair. And the third player also calls. So now there's roughly 600, 400. So there's $1,000 in the pot. And the turn is a 7. So the turn is a relatively good card for me. Gives me third pair. So if I'm against the straight, I pick up a few more outs to make a full house. I continue to have my second nut flush draw. Same situation as before. I don't really want to play a big pot, but my hand's probably too strong to fold. So I proceed to check. The next player checks. And the girl who is taking the lead on the flop, she now bets $1,000. So she bets full pot. And this is really my first decision point in the hand. I'm really not sure what I'm supposed to do here. I think if I think she has the nuts, it's a good call. And the reason why I think it's a good call is because any board pair, if an ace comes, my plan is I can bluff, right? Because it's unlikely anyone has aces. I could have aces as played as the pre-flop raiser, or I could have ace Broadway cards to make a high full house. And I'm blocking a lot of full houses because I have all the pairs. So if any board pair comes, I'm going to bet. If it's one that makes me full house, I make the nuts. If it is the ace, I'm going to turn my hand into a bluff. And if the flush comes in, I have the second nut flush. So there's a lot of ways for me to win this pot. So I think I have to continue with a call. But I'm not like super loving the situation, and maybe it's a fold and I'm playing a bit too loose. This is one I'm not sure what's best. So anyway, I make the call, and the third player surprisingly also calls. So now I really actually don't like my hand, right? It's possible that uh I could be drawing to a worse flush, and I could be drawing to a worse full house, and I could already be behind the main nuts. So I'm in a really interesting situation that, maybe I could have been playing a bit more disciplined, and out of position, you just have to fold my hand because none of my outs really make me the nuts. But anyway, we go three ways to river. There's $4,000 in the pot. And Jen, I get the seven of clubs on the river. So this is an interesting card, right? Because it obviously makes a flush and it makes a full house. So the nuts are dead, right? So if you're in there with just naked queen 10, your hand's kind of dead. So, the action's on me, and I considered leading on this card for obvious reasons. I have a full house. I think I could get called by a flush. And, if someone has a greater full house and decides to raise, I think I could just comfortably fold my hand. So in retrospect, I think I would have preferred a lead. But in the moment, I decided to go with the check. Because it brought in the flush and it was multi-way, I thought by checking, maybe someone was drawing to the higher flush and would consider betting this card. And then I can get value in that way. And if it checked around, I'm okay just showing down and winning because, if I put a lot of money in, I can get myself in a really dicey situation where, someone could raise and I'm in a spot. So anyway, I go for a check. The player who was also just calling bets $1,000. So they bet 1,000 into a pot of $4,000. So they're only betting a quarter pot here, which is quite a small bet. The original raiser, she folds, and now the action's on to me, and I am getting, it's $1,000 to me. There's $4,000 in the pot. Their bet was 1,000. So I'm getting 5-1 here with a full house. And I fucking hate it. I swear in the moment I tanked for about a minute and a half. And I just had a feeling that this particular player is never bluffing, right? He's not good enough to bluff here. And the bluff is kind of a bit of a suicide bluff. And I just had a really, really bad feeling, right? Like, what is he calling with? Pocket kings, pocket jacks, pocket aces. I just really had a really bad feeling in the moment. And, obviously I call because I have a full house and I'm getting 5-1. And, just by the off chance that he decides to maybe bet the nut flush, I am beating him. But I called, he turns over king, and I just lose the hand. And, I'm really annoyed with myself because, again, one of my goals coming into this year is I identified a flaw with my play style, that I call too much on the rivers. And this is one of those scenarios where I should have just recognized the situation, that even though I have a full house, this particular opponent is never betting a worst hand into two players on that river. So my full house almost means shit, right? It's either I'm just always beat. And I should have recognized that in the moment and folded. Now, one thing I did consider after the hand, when, I was reflecting on the hand afterwards, is that would have been a really interesting spot to raise. And I think if I had the ace instead of the king, I would have maybe considered finding a raise there. And the reason why is, if he has pocket jacks or pocket kings, Well, let me say, if he has pocket jacks or pocket kings and I check raise him on that river, you know, pocket kings he probably has to call, so I would have just lost more money. But pocket jacks, he has to start to think about folding. And if he somehow had like ace king 7 or ace jack 7, he also has to consider folding, right? I'm the preflop raiser. It comes a Broadway board of ace king jack. I could just easily have as played jack jack, king king, or ace ace. So if I were to find a raise there, it would put him in a really tough spot. Now I think he would call with kings. I think jacks he would have to start consider folding. And maybe kings he might find a fold, right? Like, I'm check raising that river. I'm a good player. I know what's going on. I could have aces, right? Very reasonably. And sometimes I could just have quad sevens, right? Like, it's possible. I'm not raising for value with ace 7. So, I don't know. It would have been an interesting hand for me to turn into a bluff. I wish I would have thought about it in the moment. It would not have worked because I would have gotten called with kings, but it would have been a really interesting spot to bluff, right? He can never have the nuts with quad sevens, and as played, it's very unlikely he could have pocket aces. So it would have been an interesting spot to find a raise. I unfortunately was not good enough to find it in the moment. Instead, I just paid off a nit and gave him money. So these were the interesting hands of the week. As I mentioned, the week was a bit of a roller coaster. I had one very favorable session, one less favorable session, but I ended the week ultimately a slight winner, up $2,000. So, it's a positive. It could be better. We'll continue to work on the things. I think an interesting learning that I had from this week is you can't force it, right? I think in the first game, everything kind of went well. There were really no tough decisions. So, everyone could play well in that scenario. In the second game, I think I came into the game with an expectation that, I'm just going to crush it this year. I've already up 9,000 my first session. Let's just fucking go for it. This is a bigger game. You can win 20, 30K in this game. And I think I went in with the mindset that I was going to have a really big night. And I think as a result, I forced myself to take the more aggressive action and to really push the action in certain spots, more so than maybe what my hand warranted. And that ended up with me, playing a few high variance pots and, ultimately being a loser. And I think one of the learnings that I want to incorporate in my game going forward is, go into every session with no expectations, right? Be willing to play a big pot if it calls for it. Be willing to have, a boring night where you just break even or win a couple $100 or lose a couple $100 because those are the cards that you're dealt and that's what it dictated for you to do in that situation. So that's something I'm going to try to incorporate into my game. Really just recognizing the situation, being okay to have kind of boring days and just accepting the situations that are presented to you and being really focused on just making the best decision as opposed to coming into a game with a winning expectation and trying to force action if you're not already winning in the game. So thank you all for watching. This is my first recap of the year. I plan to do this continuously on a weekly basis to hold myself accountable to my goals and to just share with you all the journey of what it's like, playing in these poker games part-time and sharing a bit of my thought process. Please let me know your thoughts on the hands that I played. And please let me know your general feedback to the video in whole. I'm obviously trying to grow the channel, so please like and subscribe and leave some comments. Thank you very much.